Further debate? I recognize the member from Oshawa.
Thank you, Speaker, and I'm glad to be able to stand in my place and offer some comments as we're debating the government's Bill 114. I want to say that housing matters, and while that doesn't sound like a particularly political statement or a partisan statement, we seem to have very different approaches on how to solve the problems that we see across our community when it comes to housing. People can't afford housing, and there isn't housing even if they could afford it. This government's 8-year housing record is one of failure, and despite a long series of developer-friendly policies like fee cuts or greenbelt changes, zoning rewrites, home prices remain unaffordable. Millennial home ownership rates are falling, and homelessness is at a crisis level across the province. Real people need real housing. And to have real housing, we need real housing solutions. Speaker, I want to tell you about Nancy, who came into my office. I had the occasion to meet her briefly the other day. Nancy brings in $2,700 a month with various pensions. And Nancy has been renting a car so that she and her adorable little dog are not sleeping on the street. So she's been sleeping in a rental car because she's been trying to find an apartment. She has $2,700 that she can count on every month and cannot find an apartment in Oshawa. Now, we have connected her with a shelter, and hopefully she can find her footing. But if Nancy, who has money coming in, can't find a place to afford, what do the rest of folks have to look forward to? Times are tough right now, and we need a government that's really committed to figuring this out. Someone who has figured it out, Speaker, I want to share a good news story. It's about the Refuge in Oshawa. So I'm a big fan of the Refuge Outreach Centre. Some folks across Durham Region would be familiar with it, but they have been supporting at-risk and street-involved youth for years. They are a very compassionate, community-centered organization, but they have not been able to connect young people with housing up until recently. And they actually came up with a masterful plan to utilize an old school. And all levels of government came together, and I will give credit where credit is due to a former housing minister, that when they went to that minister with a plan, it was able to be operationalized. So now we have a former school that is residential, and it's a whole whack of apartments that are just for one person, but it is for young people. And it costs $425 a month for them. That's what rent is, for them to live safely with a roof over their head, a little kitchenette. I had done the walkthrough as the building was taking shape, saw the apartments, just a little place that is your own. And what's different is they don't get booted out or age out into a cruel world where there isn't affordable housing. They can stay there as long as it's the right fit. And that amount of money is basically what they bring in from social assistance, right? ODSP or OW. And maybe it gets them on their feet. And maybe it helps them to get connected with that job when they have stability, when they have a place to sleep at night and a door to close, shower, community support. Then maybe they can find employment. They can bring in some more money. Maybe they meet a partner and want a bigger space because it's just a single bed, and one person only. But it allows them to make plans and have options. And I want to applaud the work of the outreach, of the Refuge Outreach Centre and all of their team. They're angels on earth. It is a fantastic organization. And now with this housing component, it means that young people on the streets in Oshawa can have a way out, a way up. And so there are creative opportunities. There are solutions, and we need this government to show leadership. That's one example, Speaker. We want to see projects like that happening across communities. Mm-hmm. But, Speaker, here we are, and while we're talking about housing, the main point of this particular bill is that this government shouldn't skip committee. because this bill, this is not a new policy. This is government course correction. So the bill is a government correction. It's not a new policy. The HST rebate for new homes was announced with fanfare in the budget, but accidentally was omitted from the budget bill, right? Oh, if only they had gone to committee, somebody might have said, hey, tell us more about that announcement. Why isn't it in the bill? And then the government might have put it in the bill, but they were in such a hurry. And I'm pretty sure that that hurry had something to do with the FOI focus. So the government wanted to get that through so quickly. They skipped committee, left out a major piece from the budget bill. But this bill enables enhanced HST rebates on new homes, as was announced in the 2026-2027 budget. These HST rebate enhancements are temporary, and they will be followed by the elimination of the long-standing rebate programs that are being enhanced. This bill does not reflect a new philosophy that HST ought not to be charged on new homes. No. Instead, it mostly reflects the federal and provincial government's willingness to use temporary tax relief to bail out developers sitting on unsold condo inventory priced higher than what the market will pay. But as I had said, Speaker, instead of this bill going to committee and someone suggesting that the government actually put what they've announced into the budget bill, we're now here adding it in after the fact. This government's FOI focus, instead of focus on priorities, is what got us here. And I would say, Speaker, that the PC priorities are wrong. These PCs have a pattern when it comes to housing. FOI changes and fiscal decisions all show that consistent practice of picking winners among well-connected developers and insiders and wedding guests and donors rather than addressing the needs of ordinary Ontarians. It's more like for their peeps instead of for the plebes. But anyway, again, back to the point, this government should not have missed committee. The rest of us measure twice, Speaker, and we cut once. But not this government. They cut twice and measure never. The government's primary preoccupation with shielding records from public access and gutting FOI laws to protect the Premier's phone records and his front bench from accountability means that the HST rebate omission happened, and that is a symptom of misplaced priorities, not just simple carelessness. Speaker, in this bill, there is nothing for renters. Renters are being left behind entirely, and while developers receive a $130,000 rebate, renters face annual rent increases, a backlogged landlord and tenant board, and no meaningful relief. And all this while the NDP has been calling for a 2-year rent freeze as an immediate remedy, has offered real solutions to address our housing crises. Renters are bearing the full weight of the affordability crisis. No minimum wage worker can afford average rent anywhere in Ontario. Average rents have risen over 50% in a decade, and renters are skipping meals, medical care, and retirement savings to stay housed. And that is in the province of Ontario. Speaker, where is this coming from? Well, the PC government has a terrible track record of failure when it comes to housing. Ford promised 1.5 million new homes, but they have quietly abandoned that goal. Housing starts are projected to fall even further in 2026-2027. 8,000 new homes from this rebate won't come close to closing that gap. While these rebates may help reduce home prices for some buyers, they will not do nearly enough to make homes more affordable for everyone. Without rent control, non-market housing investment, and missing middle zoning, many people will still be shut out. Now, HST rebates, there have been 2 of them, and they've been around since as long as the HST, and now they will be enhanced, but only for a year. So lost among the flurry of new home HST rebate announcements is the fact that the Ontario government has quietly revealed plans to eliminate the HST new housing rebate and new residential rental property rebate once the enhancement period ends on March 31st, 2027. So the Premier is quietly eliminating the permanent HST rebate programs that new home buyers have relied on for years. One more thing, Speaker. It is very weird that this bill enables the province to administer a program to rebate the federal portion of the HST, which is the opposite of how every other federal HST rebate works. The provincial part of the enhanced HST rebates isn't in this bill. Anyway, it's just unusual. I guess we'll learn more as we learn more from the feds. So who will this help? Well, developers will benefit. The rebate primarily benefits developers and investors, not home buyers. Early data suggests roughly 78% of new home listing prices are unchanged or higher since the rebate was announced. There isn't any evidence that this will get housing built or benefit home buyers. When there's an oversupply of condos during a housing crisis, Speaker, something is seriously broken. The private market cannot solve a problem it helped to create. The government needs to step up with direct investment in the affordable homes developers will not build. The $130,000 rebate primarily benefits developers sitting on unsold inventory. Developers lobbied for relief on a glut of small, high-profit units that buyers don't actually want. And the government is helping a buddy out with public money. This change is designed to help developers offload condo inventory with the cost borne by federal and provincial taxpayers rather than the builders. When HST is removed at the source rather than rebated to buyers, developers can quietly raise the prices, and there's no mechanism to prevent that, Speaker. And I would bet dollars to donuts that we won't see those developers offer their savings to buyers if they don't have to. Which begs the question, why don't you make them have to? So what are we hearing from people? Because I asked, who is this helping? Well, I have some letters from a few of my constituents. I'll share this from Andrew, who wrote, I am writing to express my concern regarding the recently announced HST exemption on new home purchases and how its current structure excludes homeowners like myself. In December 2025, my wife and I entered into an agreement to purchase a newly built home. At the time, we accepted the financial terms based on the policies in place. However, construction on our home has not yet begun, and our closing date has now been delayed to February 2027. Despite this extended timeline, we are excluded from the new HST relief simply because our agreement was signed prior to the eligibility cutoff date. This creates what feels like an unfair outcome. Buyers who sign shortly after the cutoff will receive significant tax savings, even though they may take possession before us, while we wait longer and receive no benefit. We're in the same position as many other buyers, facing long construction delays, rising costs, and uncertainty, yet we are treated differently based solely on the date of signing rather than the actual timing of construction or occupancy. Andrew says a more equitable approach would be to extend eligibility to homes that have not yet been built or occupied regardless of when the purchase agreement was signed. This would ensure fairness for buyers who, like us, are still waiting years to take possession. That's from Andrew. Huzaifa has written and said, I am a resident of Oshawa and a home buyer impacted by the recent changes to the HST rebate in the 2026 Ontario budget. I signed my purchase agreement in early 2022 and am scheduled to close in 2026. Because the rebate is tied to the signing date rather than the closing date, I am facing a $130,000 financial disadvantage compared to buyers who sign after April 1st, 2026, despite closing in the same period. This creates a significant fairness issue for long-term purchasers who committed years in advance and have navigated delays and market uncertainty in good faith. Proposed solution, apply the rebate to homes closing on or after April 1st, 2026, regardless of signing date. This would align with how HST is applied at closing, prevent potential buyer defaults, support stability in Ontario's housing market. And that's from Huzaifa. I also received a letter from Rari and Srinath, and they have written to say, we are writing regarding the recently announced expansion of the Ontario HST rebate for new homes. I purchased a newly built home from a builder with my agreement of purchase signed on September 12, 2025, and closing on March 12, 2026. We are proud residents of Oshawa and living and working in the community the past few years. At the time of my purchase, public statements indicated that Ontario would align its rebate approach with the federal GST rebate, including timing. Based on this, it was reasonable to expect that buyers in my position would be treated consistently with the federal program. However, the latest announcement appears to introduce eligibility criteria that may exclude buyers like myself who purchased shortly before implementation, despite acting in good faith based on prior government messaging. I respectfully request that the government consider transitional provisions or retroactive eligibility for buyers who entered into agreements during this period of policy transition. And those are just 3 letters that we were able to pull quite quickly. I know that the government has been hearing this. It's been part of the debate and conversation today. But my question to this government is, what about Andrew and Huzaifa and Rari and Srinath and everyone else who's in this position? How will this government answer them? So what we've seen with this bill is no committee, no rebate for them, no fairness, and I would say no plan. Had there been a plan, we wouldn't be here for this debate. It would have been put in the budget as they announced, but in all of the rush to get that FOI legislation changed, we left out major pieces. Speaker, what should we do? Well, we need to provide housing, and that we need this government to get back into the business of building housing. Affordable means not only affordable to rich PC donors, but affordable for real people, and that is a range. That is a range of options and price points. The NDP's Homes Ontario plan offers a concrete alternative. The proposal would create a public agency to partner with municipalities, nonprofits, and developers to build affordable, supportive, and senior housing on public land. And it is time that this provincial government got with the times and pulled its weight. There's a rent freeze motion before this House from the MPP for University Rosedale. Her motion would cap annual rent increases at 0% for 2 years, costing renters nothing to implement and providing $1,200 in relief over that period. This is a practical strategy that we could implement today. Marit Stiles and the Ontario NDP have a real plan to fix the housing crisis. That means building permanently affordable, public, nonprofit, and co-op homes that the private market has not been building. We have a plan to legalize missing middle housing in every neighbourhood so that young families can afford a home in the communities that they love. I don't know why that would be laughable to the members opposite. We want young people to have a future. The government continues to ignore top recommendations from its very own Housing Affordability Task Force, which include legalizing more affordable starter home options like semis, townhouses, fourplexes in all neighbourhoods as of right. Young families who can't afford a single detached home continue to be unfairly excluded from the neighbourhoods where they want to live, where they want to work, where employers want them to be able to live. The government continues to refuse to fund new and permanently affordable non-market housing like public, nonprofit and co-op homes, as the NDP has called for in its Homes Ontario plan. And the government has weakened tenant rights and rent control provisions so that young families trying to save to buy a first home are forced to spend more time paying down their landlord's mortgage instead of their own. This bill, Speaker, isn't the worst thing. Ford is quietly eliminating the permanent HST rebate programs new homebuyers have relied on for years. Buried in this bill is a plan to scrap the HST rebates, replace with these enhanced, and then get rid of that after a year. But I want to know why they won't do any real things to address the housing catastrophe that they are allowing to grow. And I would say that while the government has talked a good game about housing, although it's gotten quiet about their big, lofty goals, what I would say is that tent encampments and visible homelessness are the true measure of this government's housing record. I would ask this government to stop making a mess and to start building homes for real people. Thank you, Speaker.